Like, were my eyes deceiving me? I'm pretty sure I saw 70 million. Right, let me get closer to Mirage. Oh, that was 150 milli. Oh, hello. I just broke my game.
Life support in
Hello Pixies, Lady here, and wasn't that pretty crazy? The amount of damage that we can make Limbo do. And yes, Limbo, at his core, may be a CC frame, but he is definitely a frame that can do much more than just CC. And as you can see, he can be one of the highest damage dealing frames in an area in the game as well. So if you want a frame that can do high amounts of damage and also has incredible energy sustain and survivability, then look no further. Limbo could potentially be an option for you. So at this point, we all know that we love Limbo, or, well, I love Limbo and I'm trying to convert you all to the cult of Limbo, but be that as it may, I do think he's a very good frame because he's so flexible. And one of the things that I particularly like about this playstyle is its scalability and its capacity for solo play and team play, depending on exactly how it is you put together the build. Now, this particular loadout is decidedly more solo-oriented and much more selfish, but depending, again, on what other abilities you do end up using, if you utilize Helminth, which I recommend, there's no reason not to, and the overall weapon loadout, you can have some very interesting results. Again, this showcase is going to just be my personal, tried and true, tested method of dealing this much damage with Limbo, but I will also discuss some alternatives that you could utilize, and some just key points to keep in mind. So, key points to keep in mind. 1. The build for Limbo itself is all about strength. All about ability strength. As much ability strength as you can put on, do it. 2. You want to have something that will clump up your enemies. And Limbo doesn't innately have a clumping CC. He has stasis, which is a very powerful CC in and of itself, but it doesn't clump enemies together. You're going to want to use something like the Proboscis Cernos, a Helminth ability, or in my case, Magus Anomaly. And shout out to Marcel Pedrosa, who brought this up in one of my other Limbo videos. Good on you. I've used it. In this one right here. And you get a shout out. Thirdly, I would recommend using weapons that are in the gun category AoE oriented. So things like the Tenet Tetra, the Phantasma, or beam weapons. Things like the Gaze Kit Gun, the Nuke or this Tenet Tychron. Melee is fairly flexible since if you're using anything with a decent amount of range, you'll be able to hit multiple targets to begin with. But in this particular loadout, I will be using the Venka Prime, as that is A, my strongest melee, B, my favorite melee, and also the only melee that goes to 13 times combo multiplier. Now that we've gone over sort of the basics, let's get into the actual nitty-gritty builds themselves, starting with the piece de la résistance, Limbo. Like I said at the start, this build is really focused on ability strength. I wanted to put as much ability strength as possible, so that means putting Transient Fortitude, Blind Rage, Augur Secrets, Umbral Intensify, and Power Drift all on this loadout. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't I go for all Umbral mods? You actually will have less damage that you can get if you put all 3 of those, because they take up 3 mod slots. You get a relatively small boost to what we just wanted to be a boost in strength. So because of that, we're just using our basic corrupted mods, Blind Rage, which will give us strength minus efficiency, and Transient Fortitude, which gives us strength minus duration. The duration is where we personally have taken the hit for our loadout. And this is because, as you'll notice in the footage being shown, I don't actually keep the bubble up very long. I mostly stay in the Rift and Limbo, drag everything together with my operator, activate my 3, activate Breach Surge, and then shoot. Break the bubble, rinse, repeat. So we don't actually utilize the stasis so much so for our actual protection, but using the general rift for our protection, whereas the stasis is mostly just to keep everything clumped together and so that they don't kill us while we are priming the targets with our 3rd and 1st ability, which is in this case Breach Surge. Now, let's explain a little bit about how all of these mods work in tandem. I've kind of touched on it already, talking about how our 3 Rift Surge, which is being buffed by our Rift Torrent Augment, and Breach Surge will be correlating together. But to be a little bit more explicit about it, Rift Surge is an ability that by itself isn't really important. It's mostly going to be used as a failsafe to give you a little bit of extra protection when recasting your Cataclysm and your Stasis once all of those things are done. But in the case of Rift Torrent, we can get Augment, we can get a stacking buff to our base damage, starting at 30%, but will stack higher with a higher ability strength, allowing us to have more of a buff over time. But we get X amount of ability strength per enemy affected by Rift Torrent. So, what this build really wants is to have as many enemies as possible in a tight space as possible, as quickly as possible, so that we can then stack that buff as high as possible utilizing our Rift Torrent. So that's step 1. And that's why we want these clumping mechanics, such as the Magus Anomaly. They're arcane on our operator. So that's step 1. After we've clumped everything together, we're going to then utilize our 3, which in this case is giving us a 101% damage increase per enemy in the Rift. So you're getting a solid 3, 4, 5,000 times more damage, which will be all stacked onto your weapons. So your Tenet Tetra, your Vinca, your secondary, whatever that happens to be. And this is also PS why Limbo doesn't actually need mods on guns when you're using this loadout. Like, obviously it makes it do better, but you can actually clear things with just like a modless loadout, which is really funny to me. And it's honestly hilarious that more people don't utilize this augment with Limbo, because it actually can give you stupid damage by itself. Now, what makes this even funnier, or should we say even more terrifying, is when we add in Breach Surge. Breach Surge is the component that if you wanted to be a little bit more melee oriented, or using a gun that didn't have just quite that initial bada bing, bada boom, everything goes boom, Breach Surge will take care of that. So what Breach Surge does is multiply damage on the targets affected by it. After, of course, adding a blind effect and also adding radiation procs with this damage. So, we prime our targets with our 3rd ability, which is Rift Surge / buffed by the Rift Torrent Augment, and then we prime them again with Breach Surge. The blind aspect doesn't matter since we're using stasis, though it is kind of nice to have every so often if you're a little topsy-turvy between the planes. You can utilize that to get a little bit of extra protection while you slip back into the rift or recast stasis, whatever happens. But the primary aspect is that final bit where on kills, and anytime, the fireworks are proccing off of an enemy, but it's going to be on kills because they're not going to not die, then that'll get further buffed. So we have a Rift Torrent that is going to buff our initial damage, then that initial damage that has already been buffed gets buffed further through the fireworks of Breach Surge, multiplying the damage further, which is why you will see already huge amounts of damage in the red crit territory, but then you can just see these outliers on the edge of Cataclysm on enemies that have been banished outside of the Rift getting hit by like billions of damage. And that right there is the secret. Multiplying an already multiplicative damage type between this augment and this secondary ability that we got from Helminth. Now, let's move on to the Tenet Tetra, and explain a little bit about why this gun with this mod setup is so darn powerful. The secret is, of course, the combination of the new galvanized mods, galvanized scope, galvanized aptitude, galvanized chamber, and of course, the new arcanes for primaries and secondaries. In this case, we're using primary deadhead, which at rank 5 gives us a grand total of 120% more damage for 24 seconds, stacking up to 3 times for a total of 360% more damage, plus 30% damage to headshot multiplier and a minus 50% weapon recoil. Now, the thing about these galvanized mods is that each of them have slightly lower stats than their base counterparts, but all of them have on-kill effects that make them incredibly powerful. And in this case, we're able to achieve red crits utilizing Galvanized Scope. Galvanized Scope on headshot will give us 120% critical chance when aiming for 12 seconds. That's just innately. Now we get an increase to this, plus 40% while aiming for 12 seconds on headshot kills, which we can obviously stack up to 5 times, and of course also refresh on every headshot kill. So we have 120% critical chance, and then we can get up to another 200% critical chance. This is why if you see any of my streams where I've used this particular playstyle, we have to slowly ramp up from yellow crits to red crits, because we have to get that on-kill effect from the galvanized scope online so that we can consistently keep it up. It's sort of like combo multiplier for, let's say, a melee, where as we get to higher times, then we're going to get a higher crit chance, because we have to get those 40% to start stacking in our favor. So that's where we're getting those fancy red crits from. But what about the other 2 galvanized mods? Why do we care about those? Galvanized Aptitude is Condition Overload. It gives us a plus 80% status chance, and then on kills, we get 40% more damage added per status effect. So this is just more damage. And as we said, the higher our base damage is, the better it's going to be, because then this damage is going to get ramped up further by our third and by Breach Surge respectively, which is why all of these loadouts have a particularly fond look at damage. Why we have Heavy Caliber. Heavy Caliber is on here because more damage, more base damage, means a higher damage that we can boost, which means we'll have a greater threshold for our damage when it's being multiplied. Galvanized Chamber will increase our overall multi-shot, and multi-shot means more pellets, it means more damage. So again, while multi-shot isn't giving us a direct boost per shot, it's giving more shots per hit, allowing for higher overall damage. The rest of the build is fairly standard. We have Vital Sense for critical damage, we have Serration for a base increase, and then we have 2 mods here, Malignant Force and Stormbringer for corrosive specific status damage. The status, of course, you will want to switch depending on what faction you're up against to get the most bang for your buck. And finally, we have our Venka Prime. In this particular loadout, we're using my Riven, which gives me critical damage, critical chance, and attack speed, while removing slide attack, critical chance. Then we have a Corrupted Smite mod because we're up against Corrupted. I would obviously switch this out depending on the faction. You can read all about it in the Reaper Prime video because I use pretty much the same build on all my melees. Condition Overload. Again, some status, in this case, Prime Fever Strike for just a little bit of more dot against those healthy targets, aka the ones that don't have armor. Prime Pressure Point for a higher base damage. Gladiator Might for a little bit more critical chance, Weeping Wounds for increased status procs, and then Blood Rush for that good old combo multiplier plus critical chance increase. And there you have it. We throw on Again, Magus Anomaly on our operator with a Magus Elevate, just for a little bit more sustain for our Limbo, since he doesn't innately have anything that will heal himself in his kit otherwise. And we call it a day. I will say, on Steel Path, your best course of action when fighting Acolytes is to have everything primed as the Acolytes are spawning in, and then just fire into the crowd. Your Acolytes will be pretty much guaranteed to be one-shot that way. Violence is your worst nightmare, as he will negate, turn off, and make it so that you can't recast any of your abilities. So for him in particular, you really need to make sure that you time it properly, or you're utilizing a different Helminth ability. The damage that you get from strictly Rift Torrent by itself is a lot. It's frankly a lot. But I believe the Breach Surge just pushes that little extra minute, which will allow you to stack, which will allow you to go even further in endurance settings, and that's the build. Hopefully you enjoyed. This was a long one. I went really in depth. Sorry if this was a lot of information, but like y'all know, I love me some Limbo, so like here we are. Anyway, if you liked the video, leave it a thumbs up, leave a comment. I really am curious to see who, pulls off this playstyle the way I did. What changes do you do to make it fit your own? Make it your own. I'm really curious to hear what other things y'all try, what other weapon synergies, etc. Leave it all in the comments, or, better yet, come to the Twitch chat. Let me know what you thought of the video there. We're live every day of the week except for Sundays, so hit me up. Subscribe here, subscribe on Twitch, join the Discord, and of course you can now redeem code LadyTheLaddie in Warframe, and you can get a really awesome community glyph created by fellow friend and Warframe content creator Sylphix. So, see y'all then, Pixies. Bye!